Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, excuse me. So, I wish I had found this clip earlier to have included in my other video about Andrew Bustamante and his whole claim that, excuse me, the reason why he was in he got accepted to the United States Air Force Academy was because of the color of his skin, right? Or that was another factor. And I'm not saying that it wasn't a factor, but I'm saying what I was arguing in my other video was, how does he know? How can he, for a person who's all about verifiable evidence, how does he know that it was a factor without having been on the board who selected his entire cadre or class, right? In other words, I feel that Andrew Bustamante sometimes talks about affirmative action, either because maybe deep down inside, maybe he has a predilection, I guess, for maybe conservative ideals or politics. But my thing, actually, my whole theory about why he brings up affirmative action a lot in these interviews is because he's trying to relate to the audience, his target audience, which is majority white. And I'm not saying it's bad to be white or anything like that, but I think that a lot of people have adopted this very conservative understanding of how affirmative action works, in which they simply just think that it's discrimination against white people. Is what they've kind of just, it's particularly how a lot of people in this country would believe it to be. They believe it's simply we're finding people of color to just fill roles, even if they're not qualified, right? And I call this whole mentality the angry white fireman mentality, because like in the 1990s, in a push to get affirmative action, excuse me, in firefighting police agencies, right? You had this old guard of majority white guys kind of being angry that people of color or women were kind of coming into the mix in the fray, right? And there was this whole notion of they were unqualified to be there. Like they didn't even meet the minimum standards to be there, which is false. I mean, or not necessarily false. Maybe in certain situations that could have been true, but it's not verifiable that it was always true or majority true or not true or whatever, right? In other words, to put this into another word perspective, is affirmative action is very subjective. It's not necessarily just finding people of color or women and putting them into roles. First off, you have to be qualified, but then also affirmative action can kind of vary from organization to organization. It's really more so of just like a mandate to try to go get diversity, but in how you do that can change and vary from agency to agency. Sometimes it might just be we're just actively trying to recruit other people traditionally not included in spaces, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a chance of ever like competing in these type of organizations or industries. And honestly, one of the reasons why it's good that affirmative action is gone is not because it didn't have a beneficial impact on society. It's more so the confusion in our inability to have an objective definition of what it was and how it worked. Because everybody has a different opinion about how it works and what it's for. You typically within conservative politics, there's this whole belief that it's just forced diversity at the expense of white people, right? To kind of engender that majority white political base, right? And then you can even say in the opposite, some people think that it is forced diversity in order to rectify the history of white supremacy, patriarchy, etc., right? But the truth typically lies in the middle, often, not always, but sometimes it lies in the middle, right? It could be a combination of a lot of different things. And like I said, it's not necessarily saying that if we have, 100 applicants and we need to get some black people in here, we're just going to take, black people just because they're unqualified. And I hate even mentioning black people as like the subject of my analogy there, because black people are typically the ones who always get shamed for all of these things, right? Even though, arguably speaking, some of the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action, objectively speaking, have largely been white females throughout the entirety of its existence. But and I can try to find some proof or facts by that, right? But regardless, I wish I included this clip in my video, and I should probably just play it before I just keep running my mouth. So I'm going to play this for you, right?
it also helps to be the brown kid in a rural white school. Because guess what else was kicking in 1996?
Affirmative action?
Affirmative action was a real thing. So even though my GPA was like 3.8 and they didn't allow anybody less than a 4.0, if you had the right shade of skin and a 3.8, you're in. So so it helped.
Wow. What are your thoughts about that?
You know, the thing that I love about the United States is that the United States has always been a country that's based on equal opportunity, right? Equal opportunity. Now, frankly speaking, if I didn't get a 4.0, I can't compete with anybody else who has a 4.0 if we're talking about fairness.
Yeah.
Right? If it's true equality, then my 3.8 is empirically different than their 4.0. And this color of my skin and my personal experience and my background shouldn't play any factor in that, right? Now, what I think is happening, what I think our country has been struggling with for how long it's been now, 40 years,
Yeah.
is the idea of how do you quickly shift social evolution so that we can actually have fairness and equality indifferent of our race and our ethnicity. Like, how do we do that fast? Because we don't want to wait 200 years to do it. We want to do it as soon as possible.
Facts.
So then that's where policy and laws and experimental legislation come into play. And now they're like, oh, well, maybe if we give more scholarships to inner city kids, then that's going to accelerate the evolutionary cycle, socially speaking, of when white people and black people will see each other as equals, or how we'll shortcut our way through this awkward growth process. Unfortunately, just that's not the way humans work. So we can chase and we can fight that fight, and it's a noble fight for sure. Trying to make sure that women have equal pay to men, very noble fight. Trying to make sure that inner city kids have equal opportunity to uptown kids, very noble fight. These are all very, very noble fights. Unfortunately, the truth is, one will always see the other as a threat, and therefore they will never see each other as equals. As long as we're fighting the good fight, it's still a fight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And no one's ever going to accept the person across the aisle when they know that they didn't have the same qualifications. It's one of the reasons I'm very open about the fact that I rode on the coattails of affirmative action. I'm telling you right now, it wasn't fair. I'm telling everybody watching and anybody who asks me, it's not fair. I should never have gotten into the Air Force Academy. Shouldn't have happened. I was an absolute basket case while I was there. I was a bad cadet. I didn't do well in college. I didn't do well with the rules. I didn't do well with the fact that it was a mostly Caucasian school. Again, there's tons of stuff I didn't do well with. But they kept me there. They kept me there. My parents kept me there. Lack of options kept me there, right? Because they needed a certain number of brown kids to graduate. So I got you know what I mean? So I've been through this experience, and I've traveled the world thanks to CIA, and I've seen how it works outside of the United States.
I don't know if I agree with him on that. You know what I'm saying? Like, what makes him not think that he was not qualified to be there? And I said this in my other video, which I wish I really included this clip in the other video so I could have saved time and not have wasted time on making this one. But the thing is that you notice what the interviewer, how he's responding, right? Yeah. Ah, right. In other words, I think he has these notions in his brain already. And Andrew is just uh justifying those, right? He's giving justification to his already pre-existing beliefs, right? And if you want to create an in with a person and their audience, you have to do that. That's why I think that Andrew consciously is doing the affirmative action thing because it's the best pitch to gain an audience that is majority white who has those preconceived biases and notions about affirmative action. In other words, Andrew is disarming himself in order to not in order to not undermine his target audience, right? In other words, he's giving them a win instantly by saying my very existence in these spaces that you're curious about was because I was not qualified. But you should have been there, right? In other words, so therefore they're rubbing him on the back saying, I trust this guy now. See, he's one of the good ones, right? He's one of the good ones, wink wink. Weird handshake, finger on the pulse, everything like that. Wink wink. He's one of the good ones. And I think that this is a tactic being done by Andrew, which I kind of talked about in my previous video, right? And he's keeping eye contact with the interviewer, right? Making sure he's reading his Andrew's making sure he's reading whether or not this tactic is working, right? And it's working hook, line, and sinker, right? Because I hate to say it, a lot of white people have this conservative framing of the issues, right? They literally think that, affirmative action is just anti-white discrimination, but they can't say it, otherwise they're going to be called racist themselves. When affirmative action is a very, which is why it's good it's gone, is because it was kind of subjective. It wasn't always about quotas. It could have been about just expanding your hiring recruitment policy or something like that, right? It could have been maybe setting up more offices closer to majority minority areas or centers or whatever, just so you don't necessarily have to recruit people of color because they're naturally closer to your job to know you're a possibility for employment. It could have been a lot of different things going on with affirmative action. But because it was so confusing and the conservative idea of affirmative action took over, it's best that it's just gone. I don't care that it's not here anymore because so many people of color who are qualified have to engage in this self-depreciating mentality to justify their existences in majority white spaces, to placate the egos of those around us so we don't seem like threats. When sometimes we may be the most qualified person there, if not more qualified. But even that's a subjective statement, right? It's not an exact science and it's never going to be an exact science, right? But another thing that's concerning about what I'm hearing with Andrew is he's almost kind of saying he has a very nihilistic view of reality. I'm sorry. In which he's almost saying we're always going to see each other as different or other. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's many people born of different races and colors who grew up in integrated environments who are very much aligned with, I hate to say it, the Martin Luther King version of race. Don't judge a book by its cover, right? Race is only brought up when people bring it up. You have a lot of people who are just kind of existing around each other, and they'll probably defend their friends if an actual racist comment is mentioned or brought up, right? I don't think it's this zero sum game, and this is what I noticed about Bustamante, even his wife, with all due respect. They have a very zero sum real politic, kind of devoid of morality kind of viewpoint on the world just because I think of their traumas and experiences in the agency, their own personal backgrounds, lives, personal anxiety, what have you. Because at the end of the day, does Andrew Bustamante's voice matter? It absolutely matters. But then again, it's just an iota of information. He can have all the experiences he wants in the world. At the end of the day, it's still not the entire truth. It's just an iota of the truth. That's why I would take his information with a grain of salt. I would take FD Signifier on the left, more communist, social justice, intersectionality, you know, bell hooks, whatever, viewpoints with a grain of salt. It's just a piece of the larger map, right? Trying to understand our existence and our ontology, what it means to be, right? As humans and trying to discover the truth. So it's just very interesting, right? That he keeps mentioning this affirmative action thing, but I'm thinking, what is your verifiable evidence besides you just doing a calculation in your brain? And you may be asking your buddy, oh, what GPA did you get? Oh, I got a 4.0, but he's white. Oh, wow, I got a 3.8, but I'm not white. What makes you think? Put it this way: why is GPA just the all in B scale for success? You know what I'm saying? There's something contradictory here in us as people, and even Andrew, right? It's kind of like, how can I put this words right? A GPA and an SAT score aren't necessarily empirical evidence of intelligence. Some people are just really good at taking tests. You can almost make the argument that certain communities have access to certain drugs like Adderall, which helps them test better, right? We don't think about it that way, do we? Do we do drug tests before you take the SAT, in which white kids and Asian kids may have higher access to Adderall or something to help them study versus the minority kid who was working a late shift at Popeyes or KFC, who has to go have his uncle's cousin drop him off at some random school to take the SAT, and he feels like shit and is tired and the room is cold. You know what I'm saying? Even how we take tests is subjective and everything. And in theory, that's what affirmative action was trying to solve. In other words, there's other factors that goes into intelligence and employability, right? So what makes Andrew really think that he wasn't qualified to be there just because of a 3.8 versus a 4.0, when there was other characteristics that he could have done professionally in his life, not doing drugs, working, having a high school job. He worked at a clubhouse at a golf course, right? He did other things that would basically say these are the characteristics of building a young leader, right? We're indifferent to his race. But we're glad that he so happens to be of a different race or ethnicity or whatnot, because we might even be able to gain more things from him in a learning environment, right? Because maybe we have too many good old boy officers, right? Who want to listen to country music and fly Confederate flags and drive trucks and drink beer and chase tail and everything like that and treat the military like it's Top Gun in the 1980s. Maybe we need more Andrews, right? But why would Andrew just reduce his entire existence in this space to affirmative action, unless he's trying to just engender sympathy and gain trust like a spy amongst his target audience in order to sell and pitch Everyday Spy, his company, which is literally on his t-shirt? Maybe I should have been the CIA. I don't know if this is necessarily the exact quality. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just even suspicious, right? And you got to think too, the vast majority of the people who are interviewing Andrew are white, so they're not necessarily going to call him out. So because they don't know, they have their own. Some of them have their own preconceived notions. Because, like I said in my previous video, a lot of the YouTube space is white, male, white, straight driven. Military videos, special forces videos, the comedian space, the edgelord space, conspiracy theories. These are majority white spaces. Andrew knows that, right? But the thing is about, I grew up in the military as a person of color, as a black person. I grew up in the military. I lived all over the place. I know what it's like to be in environments where I'm some of the only black kids in the school. And I hate to say it, I came from a great family, but sometimes those teachers, those students saw me as a threat. I had to be the most problematic one in the class just because of the notion of black children are problematic, right? And some of that trauma that other people don't see, you internalize and you start making excuses for the system, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not some far leftist who are just like, I told you so. You hang around with too many white people, you're gonna start hating yourself, because I don't believe that either, right? I think you can grow up in non-white, non-minority spaces and still have a sense of self and confidence in being. You just have but that's just a journey that you go through by yourself. And we all have different conclusions when we come out of our journey. And I came out of my journey being able to articulate things the way I'm articulating to you now. Andrew, on the other hand, seems to be kind of still wavering, I hate to say it, with kind of a white mentality to a certain extent, which is not bad necessarily, but he needs to realize that he's framed he's framed issues through a white conservative lens, and he just thinks that that's just how it has to be. So either he's being controlled by that, or he's aware of that and he's not controlled by it, but he needs to make these affirmative action talking points, like I said, to engender sympathy amongst his majority white audience, right? To disarm them so they're more susceptible to the information he has to share, like a true intelligence asset. In other words, manipulating your audience. And I see through it. But I wish you the best. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think you need to go there in order to do that, right? And it would just be very interesting, right, to see him go on podcasts that don't have white people on it, or not white people on it, but aren't being led by white people. And I'm not saying it's a crime to be led by white people or to hear white people or whatever, right? It would just be interesting to see if the same thing, if what he mentioned this affirmative action story to a person on the other end of the microphone who was black, Asian, Hispanic, LGBTQ, whatever, right? So it's just interesting. And I think let me just go back here. Okay, here it is.
High school, and I didn't realize how positive affirmative action was on my side at the time because it was 1996 or whatever whenever I made the decision, and that's why I just started applying to the military academies: West Point, Naval Academy, Coast Guard Academy, Air Force Academy, and then Air Force Academy got back to me, and that was when I was like, "Yep, let's go do the thing," because I'm getting the hell out of here, and I'm not staying with my parents.
Nope.
Yeah.
And what are some of the requirements or tests that they put you through for you to be, the pilot?
Yeah, so to get into the Air Force Academy, I had to go through like a physical exam. My grades had to be assessed. I had to get sponsorship from a congressperson or a senator.
Really?
Yeah, so that's really where things got kind of hinky for me because anybody can write a report, anybody can write an essay, anybody can talk about, why they would sacrifice their life to protect their country and write about American freedom. But it's totally different when you've got, 200 people in the state trying to get 2 spots from one senator. And that's where I found myself. So I got lucky, man. I was a busboy in a golf, like a golf club, not a cafe. What are those things called? Like a
diner?
Yeah,
a diner.
Like
they don't even have them anymore.
Like a restaurant at a golf club.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that the congressperson for our district played golf on that golf course.
Oh, the clubhouse, right?
The clubhouse. Yeah, thanks,
okay.
man.
Yeah.
So then the manager, the general manager for the clubhouse, was like, "Hey."
So there you go, right? So he mentions it again, right? Like I said, it's very interesting. So he keeps mentioning it up, and this is not the second time. That's 2 examples. I've heard him say this at least another 2 times, at least in interviews with some, not going to say prominent YouTubers, but other YouTubers, right? So he keeps saying that I was a beneficiary of affirmative action, but what is your verifiable evidence for a fact-based person to prove that besides you already being inculcated or indoctrinated with a sense of, I hate to say it, slight minority hatred that we all kind of have a little bit from a white supremacist system? In other words, you're trying to rationalize your existence there because you may be getting hostility and certain looks from certain people, which makes it seem like you don't belong there. So you're trying to placate, put a band-aid over why you belong in these spaces, right? When really, as a whole person, right, people just don't want to hire just nerds who are really good at taking tests when they don't have street smarts, right? Which is something he advocates for. He advocates for getting rid of college educations and things like that when it comes to the intelligence community. In one hand, so you do promote the subjectivity of people and a kind of full person approach to hiring people in order to get like the best lean, efficient, intelligence operatives elsewhere, but you don't support it necessarily, like in your own. I'm just a little confused here. It's like how do you really know that you were an affirmative action hire without you having hacked into everybody's files and have known, right? And what is affirmative action when there's nepo babies and there's legacy hire or legacy recruitment, right? What makes you think that Senator So-So's boy Johnny from the ritzy suburbs of Baltimore, who only went downtown every now and then to score a little weed from some black people, what makes you think that he was deserving of going to the academy and you weren't? Why are you undermining yourself in order to placate, let's just be real, white egos when you could have deserved to have been there? And this is what his parents should have been telling him. This is what his people should have been telling him. And the fact that nobody said this makes me think that, wow, you really must have been from a very rural place in Pennsylvania. That's what I'm saying. You can grow up around all white people all you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. Many of my best friends on earth here are white people, right? All my best men were white people and an Asian guy, right? In my wedding, they mean a lot to me, right? Ride or die type to a certain extent, right? There's nothing wrong with being around white people. There's nothing wrong with that though too. But there is something wrong with sometimes we're around so many, and sometimes they do come from these conservative right wing mentalities that have negative viewpoints or cynical or dismissive points about people of color, that we adopt those ourselves as people of color. And you have to shake that. You know what I'm saying? Like, why are we adopting their narrative of us? But we're supposed to reject the narrative we might experience of them. So even when it comes to supremacy, supremacy doesn't necessarily just enforce itself with power and violence. It basically needs Stockholm syndrome. It basically needs a lot of people to think that it's our fault, right? Everything's our fault, right? The reasons why things they are. They don't want you psychoanalyzing things. They don't want you deconstructing things. They don't want you looking at history. They want you to look at the world how it is underneath the false equivalency that everything is naturally equal. And the reason why your people are down and bad is because of their innate inferiority. That's one of the reasons why white supremacy and other types of supremacy of any system persist, right? You can say that there's the same type of mentality probably happening in some African countries, in which you have certain groups, ethnic groups, having power over other ethnic groups. This is just the human condition of majorities trying to enforce their will upon minorities. And you can't just do it with violence, you have to do it with psychological warfare. And I feel like certain parts of the white supremacist psychological warfare has effectively won over the consciousness of Andrew Bustamante. But I think he's smart enough and angry enough to be aware of it. But he still needs to pitch his company and his expertise. So therefore, he goes into these podcasts placating the host in order to placate the audience. It's a Trojan horse technique, right? It's one of those things, right? Is put it this way, right? I went to a wedding once in Idaho, right? Idaho. I'm black. I went to a wedding in Idaho, right? I'm the only black person there. Only black person there. But I've been in environments like this before. I know how to handle myself, right? Which is why I don't have too much time for you know, left like far left black people who just don't really interact with white people who want to complain about white people all day. Because it's like I feel like I've actually been in the trenches. You know what I'm saying? You can say I talk a certain way, dress a certain way, motherfucker. I've been in the trenches when it comes to being around white folk and everything like that. And like I said, vast majority awesome people. But I was at a wedding, right? And I'm coming in kind of a little bit cynical, right? Because I already know, people will probably have their preconceived notions of me, yada yada, right? But I don't let it create anxiety or paranoia, right? Because I've been here before, right? I've been in these spaces, right? And I decided to test my theory, right? I'm just gonna make a self-depreciating black joke, right? And see if it engenders laughter, right? Or whatever like that. I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't anything too crazy or anything like that though too. I think it was like a joke or something like that. Like, oh, they probably thought I stole something or whatever like that, though, too, right? Or just something goofy. I'm not sure what it was. And I remember just all the fellas were just laughing, all the white dudes were laughing and stuff like that, right, too. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. Like, it's just kind of funny. It's like in certain spaces, just creating like this sense of self depreciation or whatever, um, engenders like this sense of like trust amongst other people. And I repeat, I'm not saying this about the majority of white people. I'm not saying that this is. Don't go looking. If you see a person of color around a bunch of white people, don't think that they're just like undermining themselves constantly in order to fit into these spaces, because then you're stereotyping someone. You don't know. But like I'm saying is that it can be a possibility that that could go on in certain instances, right? Life is not these crazy objectives, man. These crazy objective truths that we're so constantly trying to fit in, right? Um, but there's that, and like I said, I'm gonna get ready to end the video here, and just this Andrew guy, man. Like I said, I wish him the best in his career and everything too, and it's just very fascinating. It's just like, why would you undermine your success, your hard work, just because? But who cares? You were a basket case. You were young. Everybody's depressed in college. I was depressed in college. I transferred schools once. You know what I'm saying? It happens. You know what I'm saying? You're a young person from a controlled environment, and then you're basically just thrown into freedom around all different types of people. And sometimes you think that college is going to be better than high school, but in many ways it's not. In certain cases, it's more hypersocial. It's more stereotype. It's more restricting in certain ways at certain colleges, right? So he's creating all these excuses to be like, he's almost kind of like justifying the reasons why he left and why he hated it. Instead of finding any sort of positive, he's finding all negatives to justify where he is right now currently in his life, which is in a good spot. But I noticed that every single place he's been at, there was a reason why he left, right? And I feel like being an adult myself, I realized that that was even a habit that I would do, right? You always want to, if you want to leave a place, you have to justify why you want to leave, right? Or something, or why you want to quit, or why you want to throw down, right? And some things you are good reasons to, but you need to create excuses, right, in order to justify your actions. And it looks like he's almost like pondering off the top of his. When it comes to psychoanalyzing himself, it seems to be like he's almost more um, in deeper thought a little bit, right? But when it comes to understanding other people, right, I notice his eyes seemed a little more locked in, focused, like he's studying human behavior to see what he can slip through. And I hate to say it, for a person in some of these interviews he's doing when he's talking about narcissists, when he's talking about these type of things, he has some of those characteristics himself. We all have these characteristics, right? In other words, it's the world's fault, not our own fault, why we are where we are, right? And we have to create excuses and justifications for that, right? But that aside, right? It's man, it's just interesting, like hearing him continually talk about this affirmative action stuff when I don't think he has verifiable evidence of the fact, and also for a person who likes to challenge authority and thinks that like the standard way of doing things is the wrong way, why wouldn't that have not applied even to affirmative action if he were truly an affirmative action candidate back in 1996? In other words, if it's okay for him to say that we should get rid of college educations and everything like that, why was it not okay to say that we should include race or some other characteristic as encompassing the full whole person concept of creating a total force for the betterment of the U.S. military and intelligence community, right? How do you know? It is what it is, right? Um, in summary, I think he's undercutting himself. A, B, I think he does this as a conscious and subconscious reflex when dealing with majority white spaces that many people of color have the habit of doing in order to placate and engender ourselves with majority audiences who might see us naturally, who might stereotype us basically off the rip, right? They see me as a black person, they think BLM, they think Democrats, they think, angry black guy or something like that. So therefore, I feel like I have to disarm them to be like, no, I'm just Quentin, right? And I feel like this is just a habit that we feel like we have to do as minorities, or just people that just aren't straight white men in these majority white male space controlled areas, right? But I'm not saying this to make white people feel bad, right? And I'm not saying that this is a habit or an expectation that all white people have of others. We're really dealing with kind of like subconscious biases and habits here, more so than the conscious ones. Because we get to the conscious ones, even though they're more honest and upfront, they're also more blunt, right? And a lot more like alarming feeling, right? But our subconscious ones, even though we don't see them or whatnot, they can be equally as damaging as our conscious actions. Um, but anyways, uh, I just don't know if what he's saying is 100% true. And it will be interesting if you were to watch any of these videos, if he would change his behavior, if he would double down in his behavior, or I don't know, like it's very interesting. I think he knows what YouTube is kind of targeted towards males, probably age 16 to 34, who are kind of into conspiracy theory videos, CIA, special forces, military history, comedy type videos, maybe some sports commentary or whatnot, barstool sports, all this type of stuff. So he understands that as a one man show or a 2-person show with his company, he needs to market himself, right? And the best way to market is to, from his perspective, fit in with your audience, right? Could be a chameleon, right? Um, and it's just very interesting. So, with that being said, I think I'm just gonna end it right here, right now, and just kind of take care. All right, thank you. Bye.